Today we are going to explore one of the most curious and influential inventions of the European Middle Ages, the lottery. In this documentary, you will discover how a system created to solve a financial crisis in a small Flemish city transformed into a phenomenon that crossed centuries and continents. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. The year is 1440. In the narrow and winding streets of Bruges, a prosperous port city situated in the heart of Flanders, the air is thick with tension. Merchants walk hurriedly along the canals that cut through the city like silver veins, but their faces reveal a concern that goes beyond everyday business. Something has happened, something that shook the foundations of that community and would require an unprecedented solution. Bruges, at that time, was one of the wealthiest cities in Europe. Its weavers produced wool fabrics so fine they were coveted by nobles across the continent. Its bankers moved fortunes that financed wars and built cathedrals. Its ports received ships loaded with spices from the East, wines from France, and wool from England. It was a city where money flowed like the water in its canals, where artisan guilds held power that rivaled that of the local nobility itself. But all this power came at a price. The guilds, organizations that brought together workers from each trade, became so influential that they began to challenge the authority of the Duke himself. And when the conflict between the interests of the artisans and the desires of the aristocracy reached its boiling point, violence was inevitable. The revolt broke out in the streets of Bruges like a fire consuming dry straw. Guild members, frustrated with taxes they considered unfair and restrictions on their trade, took up arms. Shops were looted, properties were destroyed. Blood stained the stones of the squares where, in better days, merchants negotiated their goods under the golden sun of Flanders. Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, was a man who did not tolerate disobedience. Ruler of a vast territory extending from the Low Countries to the borders of the Kingdom of France, he had built his reputation on a combination of political cunning and an iron fist. When news of the revolt in Bruges reached his ears, his response was immediate and devastating. The fine imposed on the city was colossal. And Soul, amount so absurdly high that even the overflowing coffers of Bruges were not enough to pay it. The municipal treasurers calculated and recalculated, and the numbers always told the same grim story. The city was on the brink of financial ruin. Everything they had accumulated over generations of hard work and prosperous trade would be swallowed by that punishment. The city councillors met in sessions that stretched late into the night. Candles melted onto oak tables, while grey-bearded men debated solutions that always seemed to slip beyond their reach. Raising taxes was unthinkable. The population was already exhausted and resentful following the revolt and its bloody suppression. Any attempt to extract more money from the citizens could reignite the flames of rebellion. It was then that someone, whose name history has not preserved, proposed an idea that would change the course of events. What if, instead of forcing citizens to pay, they could convince them to contribute voluntarily? What if they transformed the payment of a hateful obligation into an opportunity for gain? The city already possessed a system of auctions for certain privileges. Among them, the most lucrative was the position of Schroeder, the wine porters who held a monopoly on transporting barrels in the port. These men had the exclusive right to unload barrels from ships, drag them through the city streets, and lower them into their customers' cellars. In exchange for this work, they could charge fees on every barrel that passed through their hands, a source of income that made the position extremely coveted. Traditionally, when a Schroeder died or retired, his position was sold by the city to the highest bidder. The money collected went into the municipal coffers, and a new porter took over the post. It was a simple and efficient system, but one that benefited only those with enough resources to participate in the auction. The revolutionary proposal was to transform this auction into something different. Instead of selling the position to the highest bidder, the city would sell tickets at affordable prices. Each ticket would give its holder the same chance of winning. It didn't matter if the buyer was a wealthy merchant or a humble shoemaker. Each piece of paper carried the same promise of fortune. In 1441, when the position of the Schroeder named Peter Denhunt became available, the authorities of Bruges decided to test their new idea. But they went a step further, a step that would transform a simple draw into something truly innovative. In addition to the main prize, the coveted wine porter position, they would offer secondary prizes in cash. This decision was a stroke of genius. Many people in the city had no interest in becoming a Schroeder. The work was heavy, demanding, and required a physical constitution that not everyone possessed. But money? Everyone wanted money. Everyone could use money. And so, suddenly, a draw that would have interested only a few port workers was transformed into an event that attracted the entire population. The tickets were not cheap by the standards of the time, costing the equivalent of several days' work for an ordinary artisan, but they were not prohibitively expensive either. A medium-sized merchant could easily acquire a few. A group of friends or neighbors could join together to buy a ticket and split any eventual winnings. The possibility was open to everyone, and this inclusion was fundamental to the success of the venture. The day of the draw turned into a festival. In the main square of Bruges, workers erected a wooden stage decorated with the city's colors. Trumpets announced the start of the ceremony, while hundreds of citizens crowded together, each holding their ticket as if it were a precious talisman. The hum of conversation mingled with the smell of food sold by street vendors, taking advantage of the crowd to conduct their own business. A child was chosen to conduct the drawing. The choice was not accidental. An innocent hand, free from any suspicion of manipulation, would ensure that no one could question the legitimacy of the result. With fingers trembling from excitement or nervousness, the child dipped their hand into a large basket where the names of all participants were deposited. And then came the part that would make these first drawings so memorable. The participants did not write their names on the tickets. Instead, they wrote phrases, proverbs, verses of poetry, or witty comments. When the name was announced, it was actually this phrase that echoed through the square, provoking laughter, applause, or murmurs of recognition. Some chose declarations of religious faith. Others made jokes at the expense of commercial or political rivals. There were those who used the opportunity to express opinions they would normally keep secret, protected by the anonymity of an enigmatic verse. One participant wrote a phrase that can be translated approximately as, "In God I place my hope, and from the Pope I keep my distance." The comment, clearly critical of ecclesiastical authorities, provoked a mixture of stifled laughter and nervous glances among those present. The success of that first lottery exceeded all expectations. The money raised not only helped the city pay part of the fine imposed by the Duke, but also left a considerable surplus in the municipal coffers. More importantly, it had created a model that could be replicated indefinitely. In the following years, Bruges organized more lotteries. Each time the prizes were different. Sometimes it was a privileged position in the municipal market, where a merchant could set up their stall in the busiest location. Other times, they were pure and simple cash prizes. The money collected financed projects that benefited the entire community, reinforcing city walls, building new canals, maintaining hospitals and churches. The news of Bruges' success spread quickly through the region. Neighboring cities sent emissaries to learn the secrets of that new revenue system. Ghent, Antwerp, Brussels, Liège, they all wanted to replicate the model that had transformed a financial problem into an opportunity for community celebration. The term used to describe these events was derived from the Middle Dutch word meaning fate or luck. Lotteries, as it was called, carried the idea that results were in the hands of forces beyond human control, that there was a divine justice in the randomness that determined who would be blessed with fortune. Over the following decades, at least 82 documented lotteries were held in the Burgundian Netherlands and the region we now know as Belgium. Each followed the model established in Bruges, adapting it to local needs and circumstances while maintaining the essential elements: affordable tickets, multiple prizes to maximize participation, and a public drawing that turned the event into a collective celebration. The idea did not take long to cross borders. Merchants visiting the Low Countries carried stories of those extraordinary drawings with them. Diplomats mentioned the ingenuity of the Flemish in finding new ways to finance public works without oppressing the population with taxes. Within a few decades, lotteries appeared in Germany, Rome, Genoa, and Venice. In Genoa, the lottery took a particularly interesting form. The Italian city had a tradition of betting on the results of municipal council elections. Citizens speculated on which candidates would be chosen, a form of gambling that combined political knowledge with the thrill of chance. But elections happened only twice a year, which limited betting opportunities. An anonymous entrepreneur then had a brilliant idea. What if they replaced the candidates' names with numbers? Thus was born one of the most recognizable forms of the modern lottery, where participants bet on numerical combinations instead of names or phrases. Meanwhile, in other parts of Europe, the lottery was being discovered as a tool for financing ambitious projects. In England, Queen Elizabeth I faced challenges that required resources far beyond what traditional taxes could provide. The kingdom was surrounded by threats. Catholic Spain, the dominant power of the time, saw Protestant England as a heresy to be eradicated. An invasion could come at any moment, and the country was not prepared. English ports needed urgent repairs. The naval fleet was insufficient to face the Spanish galleons. Coastal defences were in a precarious state. Sir William Cecil, Elizabeth's astute Secretary of State, was well aware of the success of lotteries in the Low Countries. He proposed to the Queen that England adopt the same system. In 1567, the first English state lottery was announced. Posters spread across London promised magnificent prizes, including £5,000 for first place. Elizabeth even offered participants temporary immunity from arrest for certain minor crimes, a reflection of turbulent times. Despite all the propaganda, the English lottery was not the success expected. Tickets cost 10 shillings each, a price that excluded the vast majority of the population. When the original deadline expired, less than 10% of the 400,000 available units had been sold, forcing Elizabeth to postpone the drawing. The drawing finally took place in January 1569 in front of the old St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The process was extraordinarily time-consuming. Since the prizes had been reduced proportionally to the number of tickets sold, organisers had to recalculate each payment individually. It is said that the entire drawing took 4 months to complete, with clerks working day after day to process all entries. Just as in Bruges more than a century earlier, English participants also wrote phrases on their tickets instead of their real names. Some of these phrases survived in historical records, offering a fascinating glimpse into the hopes, fears, and humour of ordinary people of that time. One participant wrote a prayer for the health of his 20 children, a surprisingly large family even by the standards of the era. Another made a critical reference to the Pope, echoing the anti-Catholic sentiments that permeated English society after the break with Rome. Elizabeth's lottery may not have been a commercial success, but it established an important precedent. It demonstrated that the government could use the mechanism of the lottery to finance projects of national interest, a lesson that would be remembered and applied in the following centuries. Let us return now to the European continent, where medieval lotteries continued to evolve and multiply. In Italy, 15th-century merchants had developed their own versions of the system. Commercial lotteries were organized to sell goods that might otherwise sit unsold in warehouses. Instead of simply lowering prices, which could damage the reputation of the products, merchants offered the chance to win valuable items for a fraction of their actual cost. Italian governments were quick to realize the potential. State lotteries were established in several city-states, each adapting the model to its specific needs. In Rome, the funds raised helped finance ambitious papal constructions that transformed the city into a showcase of Catholic power. In Venice, lottery money contributed to the maintenance of the formidable arsenal that kept the Republic as a naval power in the Mediterranean. The way lotteries were conducted also evolved over time. Some cities developed what became known as the class lottery. a more complex system where tickets were drawn in progressive series with the value of prizes increasing with each round. It is important to emphasize that medieval lotteries were not seen in the same way that gambling is often perceived today. In the mentality of the time, there was a clear distinction between betting on events that depended on skill or manipulation and participating in a drawing where the outcome was determined exclusively by divine providence. Many theologians of the time argued that the lottery was an acceptable way to distribute resources because it placed the decision in the hands of God. If someone won a prize, it was because they had been chosen by a higher force. If they lost, it was because that was not their destiny. This religious justification helped legitimize lotteries in societies where the church exercised enormous influence over daily life. Not by chance, many medieval lotteries had explicitly religious purposes. Churches and monasteries organized drawings to finance the construction of new temples, the acquisition of sacred relics, or the maintenance of hospitals and orphanages. Participating in these lotteries was seen almost as an act of charity, a way to contribute to the common good while having the chance to receive a material reward. Organizers of medieval lotteries faced considerable logistical challenges. In an era before the printing press with movable type, each ticket had to be prepared individually. Sales records were kept in handwritten books, with scribes working long hours to document each transaction. The drawing itself required careful supervision to ensure that no one could accuse the organizers of fraud. Transparency was fundamental. Lotteries were public events precisely because the community needed to witness that everything was being done fairly. The stage erected in the square, the innocent child chosen to make the draw, the reading aloud of each winning ticket, all these elements were designed to create trust in the system. And it worked, allowing lotteries to develop a reputation for reliability that ensured their survival and expansion over the centuries. Lotteries also had a social function that went beyond simple fundraising. They created moments of community unity in an era where opportunities for collective celebration were relatively rare. The day of the draw was an informal holiday, an occasion to set aside daily work and participate in something larger than the individual routine. In the squares and markets where the drawings were held, people from different social strata mingled in a way that did not normally happen in the rigidly hierarchical society of the medieval era. The wealthy merchant stood side by side with the humble artisan, both equally anxious to hear their verses read. It was a temporary social leveler, a moment when fortune could smile on anyone, regardless of their birth or position. The verses and phrases written on the tickets also served as a form of popular expression. In a time when most people were illiterate and where freedom of expression was a non-existent concept, the lottery offered an escape valve. Protected by the anonymity of an enigmatic proverb or an ambiguous verse, a participant could express feelings they would normally keep hidden. Veiled criticisms of authorities, jokes at the expense of disliked neighbors, declarations of love, laments about the hardness of life. All this found expression in the phrases written on lottery tickets. The organizers, by reading these phrases aloud during the draw, involuntarily became spokespeople for a chorus of anonymous voices, each telling its own story in a few words. There was also an element of creative competition. Over time, it became a matter of honor to write the wittiest phrase, the most elegant verse, the funniest joke. Participants prepared in advance, polishing their creations before entering them on the tickets. The moment their phrase was read in public was an opportunity to shine before the community, even if no one knew exactly who the author was. As the 15th century gave way to the 16th, lotteries became increasingly sophisticated and regulated. Governments realized that this new revenue instrument needed to be controlled to avoid abuses. Private lotteries, organized by individuals or groups for purely profitable purposes, were gradually banned in many places. The logic was simple. If the lottery was a form of revenue collection, the funds should benefit the community, not enrich private individuals. Furthermore, private lotteries were harder to supervise and more prone to fraud. By restricting the right to organize drawings to public authorities or government-approved entities, regulators hoped to maintain the integrity of the system. This transition from a spontaneous and decentralized phenomenon to a regulated instrument of public policy reflects a broader trend of the time. European states were becoming more organized, more bureaucratic, more conscious of their role as managers of collective life. The lottery, born from the necessity and creativity of a city in crisis, had become an institution. The funds raised by lotteries financed some of the greatest achievements of the era. Hospitals that cared for the sick and asylums that housed orphans often depended on lotteries for their survival. Churches that still dominate the skylines of European cities today were erected with the money from tickets sold to hopeful citizens. Walls that protected communities from invaders were reinforced with resources raised in public drawings. It is an impressive heritage for a system that began as an improvised solution to a specific financial problem. The councillors of Bruges, gathered in that candlelit room nearly 600 years ago, could not have imagined the extent of their creation's impact. They were just trying to find a way to pay a fine without provoking another revolt. Instead, they invented one of the most enduring and ubiquitous institutions of Western civilization. The medieval lottery was, in its essence, a social technology. Not a machine of metal and gears, but a set of rules and practices that allowed a community to raise funds voluntarily, distribute hope equally, and create moments of collective celebration. It was an invention as revolutionary in its own way as the printing press or the compass, and its impact on human history was equally profound. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were those who criticized lotteries as a way to exploit the ingenuity of the poor, to extract money from those who could least afford to lose it in exchange for unlikely promises of wealth. These criticisms, which echo even today in debates about gambling, already existed in medieval times. But proponents of the system argued that participation was voluntary, that the prizes were real, and that the funds raised benefited the entire community. A seu, worker who spent a few days' wages on a lottery ticket was, in a way, investing in his own city, contributing to projects that would improve his life and that of his neighbors, even if he did not win the main prize. This is how great innovations work. They are rarely invented all at once by a single solitary genius. Instead, they emerge from collective processes, from trial and error, from adaptations and incremental improvements. The medieval lottery was the product of a community, facing a concrete problem, experimenting with solutions, learning from results, and sharing that knowledge with others. The next time you pass by a lottery shop or see an advertisement for a big drawing, remember this story. Remember the narrow streets of Bruges, the fine that almost ruined a city, the brilliant idea that transformed a crisis into a celebration. And if you have ever participated in a lottery, know that you are part of this history. You are the latest link in a chain that stretches across centuries, connecting you to the merchants and artisans who crowded into medieval squares, waiting anxiously to hear their verses read aloud. You are the heir to a tradition that began with necessity and blossomed into hope, that was born of crisis and transformed into celebration. Just as those first participants in Bruges could not imagine the future they were helping to create, we too cannot know where this tradition will lead us. New technologies will emerge, new formats will be developed, new prizes will be offered. But as long as human hope exists, as long as communities seek ways to unite and finance their collective dreams, the lottery will continue to exist, always evolving, but remaining true to its original essence. This is the story of medieval lotteries, a story of crisis and creativity, of punishment and celebration, of necessity and hope. A story that began in the squares of Flanders and spread across the world, that crossed centuries and remains alive today. A story that, in a way, is the story of all of us, of our capacity to dream, to unite, to transform what we have into what we desire to be. If you have made it this far, we thank you for accompanying us on this journey through time. Stories like this remind us that the present is always built upon the foundations of the past, and that the most enduring innovations are often born from the most urgent needs. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to continue exploring the fascinating stories that shaped our world, subscribe to our channel. Each subscription helps us continue producing content like this, bringing to light the forgotten episodes of human history. Also, leave your comment telling us which aspect of this story most caught your attention, and don't forget to share it with friends who also enjoy discovering the surprising origins of things we consider every day. After all, just like the citizens of Bruges nearly 600 years ago, we too are building something together, ticket by ticket, story by story, viewer by viewer.